All right, folks, it is 3 after the hour. Let's get started. Well, welcome. My name is Dan Otter. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit 403B Wise organization, 403bwise.org. I'm a former teacher who got fed up seeing high cost annuity products sold to my colleagues. So I started this website more than 20 years ago. Joining me on this journey is Scott Downhauer, who is a fiduciary advisor, the right kind of advisor. He is my collaborator in all things 403B. I am thrilled to have my brother Steve on this call. This is awesome, Steve. Steve is a principal, and maybe later at the question time, if he wants to share anything more about that. Steve Shulo is joining us, the godfather of the 403B movement. He is the first person I ever knew who was advocating for better 403B plans. So it's always great when Steve joins us. And Karl, our speaker here, he and I, we're not quite sure how we met, but we know it was within about the past year. Karl is quite the Renaissance man. He is a retired Colorado mathematics and computer science teacher, and he's the author of retirement plan books for not just Colorado, but Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Nebraska, Ohio, Pennsylvania. It seems like you've got the Big Ten covered, Wyoming, and I guess on Monday or Tuesday, a book on Virginia is going to come out. Karl has been a guest on our podcast, the Teach and Retire Rich podcast, 3 times, and I will post that in chat, a link to that. So enough of me. Over to you, Karl.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'll be sharing my slides here, and hopefully you're seeing those on your screen, but give a shout out if for some reason you can't see them or you can't hear me. Seeing me isn't all that important. There is a link on this first slide that will take you, the bit.ly 403B Wise Colorado, that will take you to these slides so that you can review them at your leisure later if you want. And at the end of the presentation, that'll be back up there again in case you don't get it now. And then I believe that Dan will probably post it as well. Dan, I'm going to hope that you're going to monitor the chat so that if there's anything that you need to jump in with, okay. So really important before we start is that I am not a financial advisor. So unlike Scott, I don't have initials after my name. And unlike Dan, I don't have initials in front of my name. So I just have my name. I'm not a financial advisor. And so one thing you need to keep in mind is that I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable, and I'm not trying to steer you down the wrong path, but you do need to use your own common sense. I can make mistakes like anyone else. And I have my biases like anyone else. So follow up, I guess, would be what I would say. So we're going to talk about all things Colorado, really all things Colorado para. And really briefly, we're going to cover, I'm going to try to talk, it's hard for me to limit myself, but I'm going to try to talk for 30 minutes or less as I go through these slides, and then there'll be time for questions. If I go too long, then somebody throw something virtually at me. These are kind of the big areas I'm going to talk about briefly. So we're going to move right into it. First, with how your para benefit is calculated. We'll talk about each one of these, again, relatively briefly, but they are all very important. First and foremost, hopefully, if you're a para member, you know this, but it's very important to know which HAS table you are in. So in other states, these are called tiers. In Colorado, they are not, but they effectively function as tiers. And so based on when you were hired into para, your membership date, and when you vested, so when you have 5 years of service, determines which table you're in. Again, if you download these slides, that actually is a link to those tables, but you can always just go to the para website and find them pretty quickly. Just to give you an idea of what those look like, here's a section of the table. If you're a veteran Colorado teacher, not in DPS, but Denver Public Schools, but a veteran teacher, you're probably in table 2. Those are folks that started a while back. Denver Public Schools had their own pension system before 2011 or 2010-ish when they merged with para. So it's possible that if you're a longtime Denver Public School teacher, you're got a slightly different table. If you're a newer teacher, you're more likely table 6 or 7 or 8 or 9. I think 9 is the latest one at the moment, might be 10. But it makes a big difference because like many states, Colorado has made adjustments, and newer teachers, younger teachers do not get nearly as good of benefits as us older folks. They still get good benefits. I would argue they're still very good benefits, but they certainly are not as good as us old folks. As you look at these tables, they're pretty easy, I think, once you take a look at them to understand, but there's basically 3 areas of the table. There's a blank white area where if you retire or stop working at an age across the top and a years of service along the side, and it's in that blank white area, you are not eligible for benefits. And that doesn't mean you can't stop working, you definitely can, but you won't get anything from para until you age into one of the filled in cells. The green shaded cells are considered reduced or early retirement, so you don't get the full retirement benefit that we're going to talk about that formula in a minute. And then most people's goals is to get to the white backgrounded cells with the print in them, because those are full retirement and you get the full amount that the formula calculates for you. And so it's really important, I would say all the way along, to kind of have this in the back of your head, but certainly the closer you get to retirement to really get a really good idea of when you're getting close enough to start planning to make sure you don't retire 1 year earlier and take a big hit that otherwise you might not have. And again, not that you can't retire with an early retirement. There's plenty of reasons to do that if it fits your goals and your values, but just be aware of what that effect is. Calculating your benefit is pretty important. Most people know the basics of this. It's based on your highest average salary. And again, how they calculate your highest average salary is different depending on when you were hired into para. So for the vast majority of folks in para, and probably everyone listening to this right now, your highest average salary is based on your highest 3 years of salary. And it's actually not 3 years, it's the highest 3 12-month periods. They don't have to be consecutive. They don't have to be at the end of your career, but typically they are your last 3 years. But the legislature recently made a change. And for those folks who weren't vested before January 1st of 2020, it's now actually the highest 5 years, which if you're not familiar with this concept, means that the calculation will be slightly lower because it's based on your last 5 years of salary instead of your last 3. Another big difference, which is important to know, and again, for most of the people watching this, is things called Section 125 plans. So that's things like having your health insurance and dental insurance coming out pre-tax, dependent care savings account, flexible spending accounts, all can come out pre-tax. For us older folks, those also come out pre-para, which is huge because we currently contribute 10.5% to para, soon to go up to 11% this summer. So as you know, paying for health insurance particularly, and for daycare as well, can be thousands and thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars a year if you're covering your family on health insurance. And that coming out pre-para, not only do you save on federal and state taxes, but you save soon to be 11% on para contributions. One thing to keep in mind, however, is that when you get to the end of your career, those last 3 years of your highest average salary, you want to stop doing that so that those 3 years, your salary includes all those things so that you get the highest HAS you can to base your benefit on. For newer folks, again, folks who hired after June 30th, 2019, the Section 125 does not come out pre-para. Still a good thing to do because it comes out pre-state and federal tax, pre-Medicare, I believe. And but the good news for those folks is they don't get the savings all the way along by being pre-para, but they also don't need to drop out in their last 3 to 5 years because it doesn't affect their HAS. And then the other thing to think about is optimizing your pay in those last 3 to 5 years. The obvious one is to make sure you're as far advanced on that salary schedule as possible. Most districts in Colorado have a salary schedule that is based on years of experience and education level. And most of them, there's a break between, there's bachelor's, then bachelor's plus 15 or 20 or something like that, and it climbs up, but then there's a hard break at master's. So it makes sense for a lot of teachers to get that master's as soon as possible. And then after that, it depends on your district. Some districts go all the way up to MA plus 90. And so you want to be in the far lower right-hand corner of that salary schedule before you get your HAS years, if at all possible. Not to mention you make more money along the way. Again, depending on your goals for yourself and your values. Money is important. It's not the only thing. So you do want to live the good life as you view it. And so that may not include getting a whole bunch of education and moving across that salary schedule. As you mentioned, Section 125 is a great way to optimize your HAS, that if you're in that group that it comes out pre-para, that you stop those Section 125 deductions pre-tax those last 3 to 4 years to maximize your HAS. And then if you are in a district that does sick leave payout, and this is a relatively recent change. It used to be that para did not include that as para includable salary. They now do. And so if you're in a district that has sick leave payout, and if you have a bunch of days saved up, then that actually gives you an extra month of service. It comes in as an extra month after your last month of salary. So it gives you an extra month of service. And if you have a lot, so much, and the payout is big enough that it is bigger than your monthly salary, it actually can increase your HAS, because they will then use that month as one of the last 12 months to calculate it. If not, it doesn't hurt your HAS. It just gives you that extra month of service. I'm going to just keep talking here. I'm going to hope that that's okay. Another big part is in the formula is your years of service. The main way you get years of service is by working. You earn your service by teaching or by, and again, para is not just for teachers, it's for all public school employees. So administrators, teachers, bus drivers, classified employees across the board. I focus on teachers because that's the primary group here of 403BYs, but it applies to everyone. There are also other divisions of para that are for other public employees that are very similar, but slightly different than the teacher benefit. Another thing that we'll talk about in a few minutes here is the ability to purchase service credit. And not a lot of folks are aware of this, or at least aware of the impact this can have on your retirement and how you need to carefully consider this. So we're going to talk about that. As I just mentioned, sick leave payout can indeed get you an extra month of service, which, isn't a lot, but every little bit helps. And again, if you're hopefully going to live a really long time in retirement, that extra boost to your pension check is nice. And then we're going to talk about something called a transition year, which you can actually think of as subtracting a year from your years of service. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of that. So this is the magic formula for para members. You take your years of service and you multiply by 2.5%, and then times your highest average salary, and that gives you your yearly benefit from para, your yearly option 1 benefit. We'll talk about the different options here in a minute. Are my slides advancing? Are you seeing the benefit formula slide? Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Figured I better check it. If there's anybody from outside of Colorado looking in, wondering about that 2.5%, saying, wow, that's really good. It is, but realize that Colorado para members do not pay into Social Security. So para is a Social Security replacement system, not a supplemental system. So either para members don't get any Social Security, or if they worked enough outside para, they do get Social Security, but it will be reduced by the windfall elimination provision. And so this is really designed to be your entire income. So we don't have the 3-legged stool for Colorado para members. We have a 2-legged stool, which it doesn't necessarily always work, but it is para and your own savings and investments. And then, as I mentioned before, that 2.5% is if you are in the full retirement. So you get to those white cells. If you're in the green shaded cells, those are actuarially reduced because they're considered early retirement. So they'll take your years of service times 2.5% times your highest average salary, but then they will multiply by the factor that's in green, or actually they'll give you the factor that's in green that is going to be slightly less than what it would be if you actually did years of service times 2.5. And so again, not necessarily a bad thing. It's great to have that option to retire even earlier if you want. You just have to be realized that that is a permanent reduction in your monthly salary, or your monthly pension. Shouldn't say salary. Sorry about that. Again, that years of service times 2.5 times highest average salary is your option 1 benefit. And so it's important to understand the 3 different options you have under para. So option 1 is that formula, 2.5 times years of service times highest average salary. But that benefit stops when you die. There's no benefit to your beneficiary. And so if you're single, well, that's probably the one you're going to take. If you are married, but much older than your spouse, that might be the one you take. If you're married and don't like your spouse, that might be the one you take. But you have to, or if your spouse has a tremendous benefit on their own. So it really is individual circumstances that determines which one makes sense. There is one caveat to that, is that if you take option 1 and then die fairly soon after retiring, your beneficiary may get a lump sum, because if your pension checks haven't exhausted your contributions plus the interest they've earned, they will give you the balance of that to your beneficiary. But that only lasts maybe 3 to 5 years into your retirement. The second option is a reduced benefit. So you get a lower amount, typically somewhere between 90 and 95% of the option 1 benefit. But when you die, your co-beneficiary gets 50% of your benefit for the rest of their life. So if you were getting $40,000 a year and then died, your co-beneficiary would get $20,000 for the rest of their life. And then option 3, it's reduced even more. So where option 2 might be between 90 and 95%, option 3 might be typically between 88 and 93%. And this time when you die, your beneficiary continues to get your full paycheck of 100%, or your full pension. I don't know why I keep saying paycheck, full pension. So if you're making $40,000 in your pension and you die, your beneficiary continues to get $40,000 for their lifetime. The other thing to realize about both option 2 and 3 is if your co-beneficiary dies first, they have an automatic pop-up option. So it pops back up to the option 1 benefit. So you don't have any risk by taking option 2 and 3 that if your beneficiary dies first. Now, it's not retroactive. They don't go back and pay you for those years that you've already gotten your check. But when your co-beneficiary dies, it pops back up to the option 1 benefit level. How much the reduction is depends on your age and the age of your co-beneficiary. So don't worry about the busyness of this table. I do have links to these tables, but this is a sample of the option 3 factors, and you can see retirement age across the top. And if you actually go to that spreadsheet, it starts at age 1. So it's got all the numbers. And then down the left-hand side, I'm sorry, the top is beneficiary's age. The left-hand side is your retiree age. So if you look over there, that one cell, it's kind of got a blue outline. That's at a retiree at 58 and their beneficiary is 59. Then the factor is 0.911, whatever. That's what you would multiply the option 1 amount by. So roughly 91% of the option 1 benefit. And those are actuarially calculated. They do change over time. These actually are the factors that are in effect as of July 1, 2022, because the para just did an experience study and changed some actuarial factors, as well as the cost of living adjustment is changing on July 1 for retirees. And so those factors do change over time. Life expectancy being a big one. They adjusted the life expectancy tables. So those numbers aren't set in stone for future retirees, but they give you a pretty good idea of the relative differences between option 1, option 2, and option 3. You can always log into your account at para, and there's a calculator that will calculate it for you. Or you can contact para, and they're very, very helpful about laying out those options. Now, obviously, if you're 20 years away from retirement, that's not going to be terribly accurate, but you can get an idea of, you can make some estimates. The closer you get, the more accurate it's going to be. So talked about earning service credit. That's what most people think about. Purchasing service credit is a really important topic to think about. And the earlier you think about it, the better. So these are kind of the 5 areas here we're going to talk about again briefly. Like with all topics around retirement, the devil's in the details. And so you do want to follow up with this. You can follow up with me, certainly, but I always recommend you go to Para directly, because they know what they're talking about. I think I know what I'm talking about, but they definitely know what they're talking about. So it's good to talk to them. First, there's basically 3 major categories of service you can purchase. The first is rolled over or refunded service. So if you work for a para-covered employer, stopped working, went and got a different job, and chose to take your money out of the pension system, you can always buy that time back. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because that doesn't apply to a lot of folks, but that's a great option. The second and most important is qualified and non-qualified service. The difference between those is that qualified service is working for another public employer. And the typical case is you taught in another state. You can buy those years with para with some conditions and some limits. Interesting though, it also includes private school teaching that you can purchase as qualified. And then non-qualified service is anything that basically doesn't have a public pension. So pretty much anything covered by Social Security counts as non-qualified service. And a lot of people think, well, I really didn't work that much before I became a teacher. I probably can't buy anything. The bar is pretty low. For a month to qualify for you to be able to purchase, you had to make 80 times whatever the minimum wage was in effect at that time. So for example, if you're working in the early 1990s when the minimum wage was, I don't know, $5 an hour, anytime you made $400 in a month, that month would qualify, and they actually will put months together to qualify for you. And you basically can use your pay records if you want, but most people use their Social Security statement. Para will go through it and tell you exactly how much you're able to buy. I don't know that this exists anywhere right now, but apparently at one time there was the opportunity to take sabbatical leave. So if you were lucky to have that, you can actually buy that time as well. Now, the rules around how much you can purchase vary again based on your membership date. So again, for really old folks like myself who started before January 1st, 1999, as soon as we had 1 year of earned service credit, we could purchase up to 10 total years of qualified or non-qualified in any combination. So it could be 10 qualified, 10 non-qualified, 7 of one, 3 of the other. We could purchase up to 10. Both my wife and I actually purchased about 6 back in the day. For folks who started after January 1st, 1999, it's a little more restrictive. After 1 year of service credit, you can purchase qualified employment. You have to get to 5 years of service credit before you can purchase non-qualified. You can still purchase up to 10 years total, but the max of non-qualified you can purchase is 5. So you can still purchase up to 10 years of qualified. You can still purchase 5 of each, but you're maxed out at 5 non-qualified. So think Social Security covered employment, but still 10 total. The cost of purchasing, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on rolled over refunded. That's the cheapest, and that's great if you have that. For anything else, qualified or non-qualified, it's the actuarial costs based on your current highest average salary, your age, and your membership date. So there's a publication I linked to, and there's a calculator on their website where you can get a pretty decent estimate, and then Para can help you out with an exact number. This can be pretty expensive, but because it's based on your highest average salary and your age, it costs less when you're younger and more when you're older. Now, there's pros and cons of that. When you're younger, you don't have as much money available to you to purchase. And when you're older, it costs more, but you may have a lot more saved up and invested that you can use. But depending on your career path, this can be really good. So picture somebody who starts out as a part-time teacher or even starts out as a paraprofessional and has a pretty low salary earlier in their career, they could perhaps purchase credit when that salary is really low. Then they get their teaching degree or they go into administration and their salary becomes much, much higher later on. And so in effect, they bought that at a discount. But no matter where you are in your career, it's important to look at those numbers, because even though those numbers can be really big, we're going to talk here in a minute about why I think purchasing service credit is a very good idea for lots of people, not everybody. First, let me talk about the cons of purchasing, why you wouldn't want to. It is certainly possible that you could take the money you would use to purchase years, invest it in the market, and make more than the effective payout you're getting from para by buying those years. You know, there's always GameStop, right? There's GameStop, there's crypto. Okay, so I'm joking a little bit. You never can tell, but there are low-cost diversified equity index funds that over time pay a lot of money. And so there is the possibility you could make more investing on your own. If you don't use that money to buy years, you have more flexibility because you might have $200,000 sitting in a 403B that you then, you know, when you retire, you want to decide you want to buy a boat, you can take out $100,000 to buy a boat. Whereas once you give that money to para, you're going to get a little extra each month, but you can't go to para and say, hey, I really want $100,000 this month to go buy a boat. And they're going to say, well, we don't do that. You get the money every month. And another possibility of not buying years is it's possible you could leave a bigger legacy. So a bigger inheritance to your spouse or to your kids. Because once you give it to para, it gets paid out every month. And if you choose option 2 or option 3, it would continue to get paid out to your co-beneficiary once you die. But once they die, it stops. Whereas money that you invest on your own, if you haven't spent it down, when you die, that money still exists. And that is a lump sum that would then go to your heirs. And then I guess the last, but maybe the first con for some people is you do have to come up with the money to buy the years. And it's not cheap. And so you have to have a source of money either already saved in a tax advantaged account, or you can use taxable money that you have available to you to buy those years, but you have to come up with that money as a lump sum. You can finance it with para. They will let you pay over time, but they charge their assumed rate of return because it has to be actuarially balanced, which is currently 7.25%. And so that is not perhaps ideal. Now I put cons first, so you might guess that I put pros second because I'm more of a pro guy than a con guy, and I am. Keeping in mind that it really varies on the individual. So this doesn't apply to everyone, but in my opinion or my bias, for most people who are eligible to buy years, I think it is the right decision, not for everyone. So here are the pros. First of all, it moves you on those HAS tables. So you have, if you recall the HAS tables, you have years of service down the left side and age going across the right. Buying years does not make you older. It may make you feel older, but it doesn't make you older. It does, however, increase your years of service. Once you buy years, they act just like years of service you've earned. So if you picture those tables, you might move from a blank white area where you can't get any benefit into a green area where you get a reduced benefit, or from a green area into a white area with print in it where you get a full benefit. So if you picture those tables, it just moves you down how many ever cells, how many ever rows you purchase, years you purchase. And so it can allow you to retire earlier with either a reduced benefit where you wouldn't gotten one before, or a full benefit where you maybe gotten a reduced benefit. That is really, really nice, particularly if you are reaching a certain age in the middle of, I don't know, a global pandemic and want to say, okay, I was ready to teach it a little bit more, but this is hard and I'm ready to be done. Hopefully obvious, but your para-defined benefit will be larger. For every year you purchase, you get an extra 2.5% of your HAS. And you do not have to purchase in full year increments. They will do it out to decimal places. So you can purchase, 32.74621 months, and they will calculate it for you. It is guaranteed income for life. So if you take option 1, it's for your life. If you take option 2 or option 3, it's for the joint life expectancy of you and your co-beneficiary. That is really, really helpful. You can think of it as longevity insurance. Okay. So if you don't buy the years and you invest the money, that's great. But no matter how good your money does, if you buy that boat and you start spending that money down, eventually that money can disappear and go to zero. Your para benefit will never go to zero. It will continue for the rest of your life, the rest of your co-beneficiary's life if you take option 2 or 3. And there is a small cost of living increase built into that as well. The next one is, or the next two really, well, no, the next one is important and is particularly timely, which is that, again, you might make more if you invest on your own. You might blow it all on GameStop, or you might spend it down. You are shifting the investment risk to the state of Colorado. As soon as you give your money to para, they are guaranteeing that benefit. And so it matters, but it doesn't matter to you whether or not para earns their assumed rate of return. And if all their actuarial assumptions are correct, the state of Colorado is guaranteeing they're going to pay you that benefit no matter what. So they now have all the risk and you have all the reward. And that is really big. And it's particularly true right now. Last month notwithstanding, we have had an incredible run in the stock market for the last 10 to 12 years. I think compounded annual returns of about 15% if you're in a total stock market index fund. That is not, well, at least has not been normal. I guess you never know. It could be the new normal. If you use money that you have saved and invested and has benefited from that huge investment gain over the last decade, by selling and buying those years, you basically are locking in those gains and again, shifting that risk to the state of Colorado. A smaller benefit, but might help for some folks. Para does give you a small healthcare subsidy in retirement if you go with their healthcare insurance. And it's prorated based on your years of service up to 20. So if you retire with less than 20 years, or if you were going to retire less than 20 years of earned service and then you bought years, that could increase that healthcare subsidy, but that tops out at 20. So for a lot of folks, that doesn't matter. And this last one is very definitely my opinion, but I think there's a big behavior aspect to this. Just, take a number. Let's say you had, 200,000 in your 403B and you retire. That's great. And you can pull money out of that to spend. But you have to be comfortable pulling money out of that to spend. And for folks who spent their whole lives saving and investing, and then you get to retirement and you have all these what ifs. Well, what if I need that money? What if I have a healthcare crisis? What if I need assisted living? What if my kids get sick and I need to help out? What if this? What if that? And it's really hard to pull that money out of that account, because when you pull that money out of the account, that balance goes down and eventually it can indeed go to zero. Whereas when you get an extra $500 a month from para, it's really easy to spend that money because, hey, you get a check in February, it's got $500 more in it. You can spend it because, in March, you're still going to get $500 more in that next check. And in April, you're going to get $500 more again. It's like having a paycheck. It's a comfort level of spending it. So it makes it much easier from a behavior aspect to actually spend the money you have. Whereas when you have a big lump sum, it's much harder. And so I think that's a big piece for a lot of folks. And I speak from experience. I have thankfully a very healthy investment. We also we also bought years of para. I am much more comfortable spending the money in that check I get from para every month. And I still am not comfortable pulling from that big lump sum that we have invested. Okay, how do you buy it? Most people prefer to use pre-tax money. So if you already have money saved up in a 401k, 403b, 457, or traditional IRA, you can use that money to buy those years. I say 401k for the folks who aren't Colorado folks on the call. Para offers a 401k, so Colorado members have access to a 401k. Probably a 457 if their district has opted into it with para. And then many have also 403b with other vendors. But if you don't have that, you can use post-tax money. The only difference being that effectively it takes more money because you didn't get the tax break on it now. But when you get that benefit in retirement, then that portion of your pension is not taxed when you get it. And again, there's lots of creative ways. Some people these days are using HELOCs. So they've got a lot of home equity. So they take out a HELOC at a nice 3-4% rate to help them buy those years. I'm not necessarily recommending that, but that is an option if it makes sense to you. Briefly talk about transition year. Many districts in Colorado offer something called a transition year, which is basically when you retire, you start getting your pension, but you still work one more year. And for folks not in Colorado, the reason that works is you are allowed to work for a para-covered employee for up to 110 days in a year and not affect your pension. And because our school year nicely splits around 2 calendar years, you can retire in May, work the fall semester, not work more than 110 days, work the spring semester, not work more than 110 days in the next year. So effectively, you can work one more year, get your pension and your paycheck. You don't earn service credit for that year. You've already retired. And this is critical. In many districts, you don't get benefits during that year. So they cut you off from benefits. Your pay doesn't go up one more level on the pay scale. You don't get your normal sick days, things like that. So when I started teaching in Colorado, I noticed I'm over 30 minutes, but I'm getting close here, guys. When I started teaching, everybody said, hey, transition year, it's a no-brainer. You get double pay for a year. Why wouldn't you do it? Well, I'm going to talk about why you might not do it. The pros is you do get 14 months of 1.x paychecks. It's not quite double because you still get your salary, but the pension isn't the 100% of your paycheck. And so the value of that is that for those 14 months, it can allow for super savings in your 401k, 403b, 457, or in a taxable account, or paying off debt, paying off your house. The other thing is once you decide to do this, you are committed to retiring, which can be a nice feeling. The cons, however, is in many ways, it's the opposite of purchasing years. You lose that 1 year of credit that you would have gotten for working that last year. So what you're doing is you're going the opposite direction. You're trading additional monthly income for a lump sum now. And that gets back to that behavior aspect of it's easier to spend the money you're getting every month in your pension check than it is a lump sum. If you're in a district like my district where you don't get benefits that last year, that's a big hit. So you need to take that into account when you're calculating how much extra you're making by getting your pension and your salary, because you are losing what can be a lot in benefits. Again, in a lot of districts, you lose your step and cost of living increase. So you're going to make less that last year than you would have if you hadn't done a transition year, as well as that's going to mean you're going to have a lower HAS that your salary is based on, because it's basically years 4, 3, and 2 before you stop working, because that last year doesn't count, as opposed to 3, 2, and 1. And one con against it is that if you change your mind and you haven't taken a transition year, you can change your mind. You haven't told anybody you're retiring, you can keep going. Some people might view that as a pro because it locks you in and doesn't let you say, oh, I'll go one more year. Okay, investing for retirement. This is right up the 403b-wise alley here. I'm going to go through this really quick. But again, there are links from the slides that you can look at afterwards that include some blog posts that talk about it. But fees matter a lot. So these are just screenshots from a couple of blog posts I've made talking about fees, comparing that. This first one is in my former district, Littleton Public Schools. The difference between the fees you could get at Vanguard in an IRA versus the fees you can get with Para's 401k and 457, versus LPS also offers a 403b and a 457 through TIAA. Now, what they offer through TIAA, and I also include Douglas County, which offers MetLife. Now, TIAA, the fees aren't bad, but they aren't great. And if you go to those spreadsheets, you can see how much better you can do at Vanguard versus any of them, and how much better you can do at Para versus any of them. And then MetLife is even worse than TIAA. Still not horrible compared to some that Dan and Scott could talk about, but still not great. The second one is a spreadsheet that you can make a copy of as well and put in your own stuff. But just for the big effect, I compare investing in Colorado's Para's 401k versus everybody's favorite AXA Equitables 403B to show you what the difference is and making some assumptions about how much you contribute and what your assumed rate of return is. You can see that there's a 35% difference after 30 years. We're talking real money. Two good places in addition to the spreadsheets that I included to learn more about this is 403bwise.org and then 403bcompare.com, which is out of California, that lists the standard fees that most providers offer. Your district can sometimes negotiate different fees. Another area to think about is traditional versus Roth versus taxable. Really tricky to go into this in depth because it depends on your individual circumstances. What I will say is for most para retirees, you're going to have a really good benefit if you're a career teacher. And if you're a two para retiree, you're going to have two of those. So you're probably not going to be in a really low tax bracket in retirement. And so the idea of, hey, you should do everything pre-tax because you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement probably isn't going to apply to a lot of para retirees. So you do want to look at traditional versus Roth. I think most people probably want a little bit of both, and they may want some taxable as well. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are going to retire early, and for this purpose, my definition of early is before age 59.5. If you have access to paras 457, that's what I would fund first, because you can easily access that before age 59.5 without any penalty from the IRS. Now, there are ways to get at your money if you're in a 401k or 403b, but since the 457 at para is the same as their 401k with very low fees, I would do that one first. And then another thing to keep in mind is in some districts in Colorado offer high deductible health plans. The devil is very much in the details here, but in a lot of districts, and again, I have a blog post link there, it actually, you have less risk with the high deductible plan than you do with their other plans. And I know that's hard to believe, but the deductibles on the other plans aren't that low. And when you take in your premium savings and the contribution your district makes to your HSA, it actually more than covers the difference to the deductible. And so the only way that it's probably not a better choice for folks in those districts is if you have a very high cost prescription drug, because those you have to pay for those full price for those on the high deductible plan. And so there can be some situations where you'll come out behind in that stage, but for everybody else in those districts, it comes out of bed, and you can really use this as a stealth retirement account. But again, it's really important to actually look at the numbers in your district, because in some districts, then it is a risk to go with a high deductible plan, but in others, it is not. Okay, I went a little long, sorry about that. Here is some contact information for me, my email address, to websites that I run, obligatory link to the books that Dan mentioned at the beginning, with a nice little picture of the Colorado book up there, teaching a class through Colorado Education. I'm unmuting me. Okay, financial classes through Copilot, and then again, a link to those slides. There are some extra slides, just so you know, that talk about health insurance and Social Security if you want to look at those when you download the slides. Okay,